So I'm sure you all have heard of all of the different rumors about there being a teacher shortage, and I know in certain states they've been having to have weird professions like police officers come in and have to sub classes for the teacher shortage. So I think that it's kind of time for me to tell my story when it comes to why I personally stopped teaching. So, as a black young person that wanted to impact her community in a way that will be effective, I think it's important that I start with why I started teaching from the first place, because teaching was not my career path, but I do believe that it is my calling. So, long story short, after college, I actually wanted to do fashion. So I was nowhere on the spectrum of going into the teaching world whatsoever, education, anything like that. I wanted to go into the fashion world, and I also minored in journalism because I kind of wanted to maybe get into blogging or something, a little bit on the background side and not so much in front of cameras and creation and different things like that. So, I went to school for fashion, and I was tutoring as a job to put myself through school. And I actually loved tutoring so much. It was so fulfilling for me. It was something that just came naturally for me to be able to bond with my students and different things like that. So, fast forward, I was on an interview, a journalism interview, and I was telling about my current position as a tutor. And the lady who was interviewing me was so intrigued with my passion for what I was doing at the time. She actually was like, well, have you considered Teach for America? And so, if you guys haven't heard of Teach for America, I'll actually do another video regarding my experience with Teach for America and how that unfolded. But I was like, no, I have not ever heard of that. And she kind of explained the program to me and told me about the possibilities. And it sounded interesting, but I was like kind of taken aback because I'm like, yo, I'm trying to get this job with you, and you're recommending me for another job. And so I honestly thought that, like, okay, this was a sign that, like, she was not interested in me as a candidate for this position. However, she ended up later on offering me that position, and I had a decision to make. So I applied for Teach for America, and I also, had this opportunity as an option. Well, I ended up getting accepted to Teach for America, and I took a leap of faith and took that opportunity instead. Again, guys, stay tuned. I will tell you guys about my Teach for America experience, but I think this video will be way too long if I include that into this video. I just wanted you guys to understand that even though I wasn't, growing up, I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a teacher. I want to be a teacher. As this unfolded, I realized that I had a passion for it and that it was something that I was just naturally good at. It didn't feel like work to me. So I went through the Teach for America process, and I automatically fell in love. Like, Teach for America is basically a teacher boot camp, right? Program. And throughout that program, a lot of people were like, this is not for me. However, it was for me. Like, I absolutely loved every moment of teaching. I loved the butterflies that I got when I started with my new class. I loved seeing my students transform. I loved every moment of it. And so from there, I stuck with Teach for America. I taught 5 weeks in summer school in Houston. And then from there, I was placed in Kansas City, Missouri to teach my first year. So I want to talk about a little bit about my first year teaching. My first year teaching was lovely. I loved my job. Shout out to the people out there from Kansas City, because I absolutely loved teaching in Kansas City. Um, I started off at a school where the demographics were much like the area in which I came from. It was about probably 99% African American. The staff was probably about, I would say, about 70% African American, maybe more. And I just had an awesome experience. Everybody at this particular school was fairly young educators, and so we were all kind of learning from each other and feeding off of each other's energy, and we had all of these great creative ideas. And then we also had a mixture of kind of like the old school seasoned teachers who had, you know, just as much to bring to the table, and, you know, sharing those experiences and sharing those ideas made it just a lovely experience. So I taught in Kansas City for 2 years before the pandemic hit. So prior to the pandemic, I actually um, conceived my first child, and I was literally out on maternity leave when the pandemic happened. I actually have a pandemic baby, which you saw in the intro, and she will definitely make a big difference on my decision to stop teaching as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So taught for 2 years, pandemic happened, and I was also on maternity leave. Crazy, crazy situation, right? I had never experienced anything like that before. Um, so Kansas City gave us the option of going virtual. Uh, at the time, I was still on maternity leave, but as I was approaching to come back, um, everybody was still remote learning. Honestly, it was the most unorganized, confusing for children. Nobody had any clue what to do, and you know, you can't blame them. Like, nobody was prepared for what happened during the pandemic, and I think, you know, on the flip side, like looking back at it, students were the ones that were affected the most by the pandemic in a numerous amount of ways. If we think about, you know, the way that kids operate and behave, they are definitely creatures of habit. And this kind of threw off every routine, everything they thought they knew, everything that was originally, um, you know, planned out for them was no longer. So, you know, and then on the education side of it, educators were up in arms, okay? Like, for one, as an educator, we already know that administration is already here and we're here, right? We're like on two different planets. So for this to happen and for those people to be the ones making the decisions and us being the ones affected by it and having to come and put on masks and pass out Chromebooks to students and do, you know, drive-bys and house visits and drop off, like, teachers were so amazing and showed even more of their superheroism during this time, that it was really like moving to see how we can unite as people to make sure that this mission that we have to educate goes through. And so I will say that that was like a positive side of it. But on the other side, I had a newborn baby and I was going into remote teaching. I had students that would show up to class every day, and I had students that would not show up at all. I had before and after class trainings on, like, this is how you remote teach, and I had all of these different things that I had to learn on a whim. Luckily, with me being a young teacher, the discrimination that I felt before in the education system actually kind of switched. Like, now it was like, oh, you know how to do that? Can you teach me how to do that? It was like everybody wanted to have a young teacher on their team so that we can teach them how to work the Google Classroom, so we can show them how to do PowerPoints and add in memes and add in videos and have fun backgrounds, like all of these things that I normally would have been ostracized for in person, because it was like, oh, this is the teacher who's trying to change everything that I'm used to. Now it was leverage. Now it was, oh, I want your help, or oh, I want to know what you know. Like, now it was all the advantage for me, because these were things that I had did before. These are things that came naturally to me because I'm fresh out of high school. I know how to make a PowerPoint cute. I know how to make it pop up, pop out, do all of these fun things, right? I know how to find an online game that goes with, the lesson, etc., etc., etc. So now, I went from being a burden to an asset, you know. So, I definitely loved the online remote teaching, but I think that it had an effect on students who don't have the resources to be successful in that environment. And I'll get to that probably in another video as well, because that was a whole new world for a lot of low income students, a lot of students from a certain demographic. They are still feeling the effects of the pandemic on their education, unfortunately. So I was remote teaching, and because I had a newborn and COVID was still a big question mark, there was no vaccine, etc., etc. I had the choice of teaching, going back in person, or remaining into a virtual school that they were creating for the parents who did not want to send their students back to school, even after, the mask mandate and all of these different things. So I chose to teach virtually. So year 3 for me was completely virtual, and I had a lot going on in my personal life that caused me to question if I wanted to continue on with um, education. So I had a newborn. I had a house fire. I relocated. I had all of these things going on in a matter of months, with a global pandemic still happening. And so I was really questioning, if this was something that I wanted to continue to do. So by the end of last school year, literally, I had to determine if I wanted to continue within education, or if I wanted to stop teaching altogether and explore new avenues. Honestly, education is literally my heart. So I started to think of new ways to still be involved with education, but not as a teacher. So I wanted to originally be like someone who trains other teachers on how to teach, or does something with diversity and equity and inclusion. I just went through all of these different options in my head, of what I possibly wanted to do. But I had moved back to my hometown, and I felt a strong sense of urgency to show students from my hometown what they could become by investing in their own education. And I think this may be clicking on my mic, so I'm going to take that out. So I wanted to show students from my hometown that it was possible to become something great and be successful, because honestly, within our hometown where I'm from, I am from Centerville, Illinois, and it's not common to see people that are successful come back and have an impact on the students that are here, or the younger generations. I don't personally remember having anybody from my area come and talk to me and let me know that I can do it when I was in school. And so I thought, what better way to do that than to actually come and teach a classroom? So I applied for the district that I graduated from. And I believe that everything happens full circle and everything is divine in its own way, because I actually got that position to teach fourth grade at one of the elementary schools within the district that I graduated. So, a little flashback, I attended the same school district. I stayed in the same spot my whole life, prior to going to college. And so I went to the same elementary school all the way through. I went to the same middle school all the way through high school. I left, went to a different high school, and came right back within a quarter and graduated valedictorian of my class in 2014. So literally everything happened full circle, and I ended up getting hired as a fourth grade teacher at that same district. Now, dun dun dun, this is where I start with me actually deciding to stop teaching. So I started working there knowing how hard it was to be a student in this district. This district was this district still is 98% African American demographically, definitely considered in a low income area. So we already have the stereotypes and the statistics that come along with that demographic. On top of that, our area is very much, I'm sure, like so many other areas, known for a lot of political mess, and we're just gonna leave it at that. It's a lot of political mess. Our district has probably less than 10% of African American teachers, and probably about 10% of the administration is African American. But I will say that they are probably also all very much politically involved in some way. And so I would say, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why I left teaching was because administration positions in my district were not earned. They were very much acquired, not earned. And so I believe that the administration at the school that I started teaching at definitely cared more about themselves than the students. And no matter what school you work in, you have to know that your school district and your staff all have the same mission and the same vision and the same goal, which is to empower students, which is to, make sure that these students are prepared for the real world. And I don't believe that that was the case. I don't believe that the missions and the values of the school were aligned with my own personal missions and values and morals as a teacher. And so that was the first thing that like completely caused me to start hating my job. Was I feel like every day I was coming into a building where the people had gave up on the students. The people were constantly trying to find different ways to put more work on teachers and blame teachers for the educational issues that were going on, when it really wasn't the teacher's fault. There was no parent accountability. I feel like in a lot of ways schools try to take on all of the pressure of these students' lives, when in actuality there has to be some type of partnership with the school and the parents in order for education to be effective. The parent has to know that the student has homework, and the school has to know that the student has homework. The parent has to know where the student is as far as grades and everything, as well as the school. So there has to be that open line of communication. There has to be an understanding that, hey, we care about your student just as well as you care about your student. We care about your student's education, so you have to care about your student's education in order for them to be successful. So I don't really feel like in a lot of Black communities there is an understanding of how important education is in your child's future. And so a lot of them were not invested in what was going on in the classroom in our area. One of the next reasons that I stopped teaching was my daughter. And I think it also has a lot to do with the school district. It has a lot to do with schools in general. It has a lot to do with America and their view on education. But y'all know teachers do not get paid a lot of money. And I was working only 5 minutes away from where I live. However, I would have to go to work super early in order to prepare for class, and I would end up staying pretty late in order to prepare for the next day. And as a single person, not in a relationship, not having any kids, fine. I was at school 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. When it was just me. However, having a daughter, you have to think about, childcare, and you have to think about being able to raise this small person, right? And I wasn't able to feel like I was successfully doing that. I would be super, super tired when I got home. I would have papers to grade. I would have lesson plans to do. I would have after school activities to plan for. And because of how minimal I was getting paid, I was actually doing an after school program 2 days out of the week as well. So I was literally at school all the time. And my daughter was 6, 7 months at the time. It wasn't cutting it for me. I have to be with my baby. I wanted to see, my baby grow up. I wanted to see her take her first steps. I wanted to see her use the potty. I wanted to see all of those things. And being a teacher was not allowing me to have that successful work-life balance that I needed. So I was starting to get really depressed. I started to hate my job. And y'all know there's nothing worse than hating your job because you literally have to get up and go there every day in order to have the funds to live, right? And that's just the way it happens. And so I definitely was starting to like get into this depression because I would come home and my daughter would be just waking up from a nap, turned ready to play with mommy, and I'm like, girl, mommy done dealt with 30 kids today. Mommy didn't, graded papers all day. I still have work to do before I can even play with you. By the time I was ready to play, she was grumpy and ready to go to sleep. And then I had to, choose, did I want to continue working after she was asleep, or did I want to, you know, um, go to sleep so that I can have some type of energy for the next day. And so it was this constant struggle and battle between work and being a mom, and being a single mom at that. So I was definitely having some spiritual battles with that. Like I was really starting to hate my job. So I will say that that was one of like the biggest reasons for my decision to resign. However, another large reason was the COVID procedures and different things that they had going on inside of the schools. At the school that I worked at, it wasn't really clear what was supposed to happen if a student caught COVID, if a teacher caught COVID, if you had days to take for COVID. Um, and sometimes your class would be quarantined for days at a time. Sometimes one student would catch COVID and 10 students were out for 2 weeks, and there was no consistency whatever in the classroom. Literally every day felt like the first day of school. I don't like that. It was like you would have students who had been in your classroom the entire time and they were on track, and you would have students who didn't even have a place to sit in your assigned seat in your classroom yet, because this was literally their first day. You had parents who would want to keep their students home for 3 or 4 days because they might have been sick. You had teachers who might have had COVID but couldn't get tested in time to know. And so it was a lot of exposure, it was a lot of movement, it was a lot of having to be flexible. However, as mentioned earlier, students are creatures of habit. And so for them to come into school every day not knowing what to expect caused a lot of behavioral issues, a lot of just uncertainty, no trust. There was no more trust within the student teacher relationship. There was no more trust in school as an institution. So I definitely will say that that was a large part of it played a big role on my mental health. It played a big role on the students' mental health as well. So, another reason was class size. As I mentioned earlier, students were constantly coming in and out of the classroom. It was like a never ending rotating door within our classrooms. I started off the year with 12 students on my roster because a lot of parents weren't sure if they wanted to send their kids back in person or not. And the school wasn't even sure if they wanted to give a remote learning option or not. So it was a lot of tug of war there. However, by the first day, I probably had 25 students enrolled, but I didn't have that many students in person. So I probably only had 13 to 15 students at the time, which as a teacher, you know how lovely that is. However, by a couple of months, I had 30 students in my classroom. Now, being a first time mom who um didn't have a daughter who was able to be vaccinated, who has a grandmother who is my babysitter, I was not comfortable with 30 students in my classroom and not knowing who they went home to and who they were in contact with on a daily basis, plus having to be in contact with other adults every day as well. It was just really straining on whether or not I wanted to continue doing this. But I was doing everything in my possible power to not catch COVID. Wearing a mask, sanitizing, having the kids sanitize. But at the end of the day, this is school. Like pencils, crayons, touchy, feely kids who want to give you a hug. Like all of those things played a role in, whether or not people were catching COVID throughout the building. COVID cases were like popping off left and right, and administration didn't have any answers for us. Administration didn't have any clear plan for what to do. Administration was not trying to give teachers any extra days if they caught COVID. It was coming out of your paycheck for the days that you took off, and those are already minimal, as mentioned earlier. So it was very, very stressful, and my greatest fear at the time was bringing COVID home to my newborn child, and then or or giving it to my elderly grandmother. You know, so all of this was playing a role in my decision. Overall, I decided to resign. I also decided to continue in the education field by starting my own tutoring business where I virtually tutor students grades 1 through 12 online in any state. I have a couple of teachers that also assist with my tutoring business um, so that I would still be able to continue my work in education. Now, my tutoring business is not to the point where that's my only source of income. However, I could not leave education. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it so bad. So, what I did was while I was going through the motions of if I wanted to leave the in person teaching, I started looking for online teaching jobs. And eventually, I had an online teaching job call me and tell me that they wanted to hire me after doing an interview, but they did not have a position available in my area. And so I was really debating on if I wanted to move in order to make myself available for this online teaching position. However, I decided that that would not be best, being that me and my daughter had already relocated once. So I decided to really pray on the situation and continue my in person teaching position. And lo and behold, by Thanksgiving, I was contacted and offered the position in my area. And so it was really hard to tell my classroom because, as you guys have seen throughout this entire video, I never said the students were the reason that I quit. I never said that. I love my students. They are literally the only purest human beings on this planet, in my opinion. Students are literally the purest, kids in general are the purest human beings on this planet. And I have an everlasting bond with them. And so I cried and we cried, and I still go back to visit them to this day. But it was a decision that I had to make for my own mental health and for the well being of my family. Now I teach online, I tutor online, and I'm able to spend way more time with my child. I do not have the stresses of administration. I do not have the stresses of lesson plan creating, and I'm definitely way more happy as an individual. I do feel like there is a teacher shortage that is happening, but I do not feel like it is happening because of students. I feel like it is happening because America does not value teachers in education. America, teachers are like one of the worst paid careers to go into. And so I do want to encourage any first year teachers who are getting out there to definitely do an environment check when you go into a new place for an interview or to pursue a teaching job at that location. I definitely encourage you guys to look into the COVID policies and procedures, different things like that, class sizes, and I definitely, above all of those things, I encourage you guys to do a self check because there are so many teachers in education who don't like kids. There are so many teachers in education who don't believe that everybody is created equally. There are so many people in education who aren't versed or have not done their research on teaching students that look like me. And those facts are the things that send our country backwards. So, guys, I will do a video about my Teach for America experience, and I will start doing videos with my daughter. But I just wanted you guys to kind of see my experience and why I quit my education position.